Now, Gabrielle is supposed to be here and she has her own tidbit of information. But suffice to say, she's a veteran teacher. She's been in the game for about 20 years. She's done a lot of different work, currently teaches at Duke Ellington. And she's continued a lot of work as it relates to inclusion and equity, and actually will be serving as an Empower Ed board member in the upcoming school year. So hopefully when she gets here, she can talk more about her skill set. But for me personally, my experience in teaching has only spanned about 10 years. However, my experience in teaching over those 10 years are more explicitly, almost always exclusively focused to the at risk. And I say at risk because that can involve a lot of different things. I've taught students with social emotional behavior disorders. I've worked inside or volunteered inside a DC jail in the juvenile block. I've taught at alternative schools. I've been bitten. I've been kicked. I've been have fluid splashed all over me. I've had all the worst kind of behaviors from a child. And I still believe that restorative justice is the best methodology in terms of working with them, to the point that I continue to practice it as a DC Peace Team facilitator. And as I talked with Michael before, we're trying to develop that more in our school system. So, what I would like to see from y'all is your name in the chat, the school you're at, the grade, if you teach a grade, and then, of course, your knowledge of RJ from a scale of 1 to 5. So, I could say Jamal, Academy of Hope, and let's say grade adult because that's our population. And then I'll say 5 because I am a regular practitioner. So that's it. Moving on to, and again, you can put that in. And if you don't work in a school, you could also just say what organization you're affiliated with. Okay. Next question, or not next question, next subject is today's objectives. So it's kind of a tall order, but I have 6 things I would like all attendees to be able to walk away from. By the end of this, you should be able to define school culture, identify current culture trends in DC, clarify roles of school resource officers, define restorative justice, identify RJ practices that are currently in use in DC, and then, of course, list those resources as well as next steps. To begin with school climate, a lot of you gave a variety of different answers, some of which involve like the comfort that they feel, the ability to be trusted. To better understand school climate itself, I use Brofenberner's ecosystem of learning. It essentially identifies the different levels of relationships that all impact the learner. This is the most simplified version. It has general, broad circles of obviously the learner, school supports, learning environments, and policy. However, this particular model shows a little bit more detail. It involves that not only is there, the learner, the family, the school, the community, but also the impact of cultural or community norms, or whether or not there's actual cultural support. Sometimes there's community disorganization, there's violence, you have some issues with absenteeism, or perhaps you just have high expectations in a school that aren't being met. And then, of course, family issues. If somebody has like a drug addiction, there's some sort of family dynamic that is also not, supportive. And then you get into the individual where we have antisocial behaviors and just challenges in general. That is a more accurate version, but the most realistic version is this. This particular model shows all the different intersecting pockets that impact a learner. Starting from the outside, we obviously have prisons. We have the nonprofit organizations that are trying to provide supports for kids. We also have like local education authorities, so anyone who's actually managing policy. We have rehab services that may affect the family unit. We also have the healthy school dynamics and school policy that may or not be involved. And then, of course, all the other elements of parents, peers, what have you. So, thankfully, we're not going to go through all of this. The only things we need to focus on is this section here: the parents, young person, peers, leadership, teachers, and staff. Here is where school climate happens. Now, the definition of school climate. There are 2 definitions that you could pull from. One comes from ASCD, which is the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development. However, that definition we won't be using for our purposes. The other organization, National School Climate Center, also has a good definition, but we won't be using that. What you need to know, and this is answer the first question, is that everyone is involved in school climate. Teachers, principals, students, school resource officers, school staff, community members. The punchline is everyone. And the reason I gave you that question in number 1 is kind of get a feel for where people think the responsibility falls on, but it falls on everybody. Because school climate, for our purposes, is the quality of relationships. If you have a good relationship with students, parents, etc., you're going to have a positive school climate. If you don't have a good relationship, those quality relationships are poor, you're going to have a negative, less positive school climate. Speaking of school climate, teachers primarily leave because of school climate. So for those of you who actually answer school climate, that is generally the top rated reason for why teachers leave is because of school climate. Because teachers, as we'll find out, have a very mixed bag as it relates to how they feel when being there and how they feel supported. I did ask or put a question mark to kind of ask what is roles and responsibilities, because obviously if we take out the whole personal factors of people going to school, people's partners moving, all those things, what does that leave? What is the next thing that impacts teachers? Namely, and this is the most significant that I thought was important, is not enough resources for discipline behavior issues. That to me screams more so about another level of school climate. So even though roles and responsibilities are a secondary reason, really it comes down to like these instances of behavioral reactions when students are in a crisis, or whether there's some sort of fight, or even if they're just not sure what's going on with their classroom, school culture, behavior management. All that stuff impacts the culture these students are infected with, therefore impacting why teachers are leaving. Therefore, again, this just adds to me that school climate impacts just the students and teachers. So what should it look like? I would like you to take a minute and list in the chat different values that you notice that stand out for you. Like obviously we've highlighted some of these, but if there are certain values that stick out to you more than others, please put that in the chat now. Okay. One I see is important leadership decisions are made collaboratively. That one has been pulled out before, in which case we recognize that it has to be a group effort. Anyone else? All right, I see equitable distribution of resources. Yes, that's another fine one. And mistakes are punished or not punished as failures. Another one I see is respect among students for themselves and each other, as well as teachers and staff. Yes, these are all the elements that would create a positive school culture. Whether you have equitable distribution of resources that includes minorities and students with disabilities, you have a collaborative decision-making process where teachers are just as valued as principals, leaderships, chief academic officers, etc. You have opportunities to make mistakes that aren't branded as, well, you're failing your student, you're failing the school, and therefore we're going to kick you out. These are how the ideals of a positive school climate would look like. But let's take a look at what school climate looks like in DC currently. Now, this information was taken from the 2020 teacher retention report. So this is data that is as fresh as last year. And as it says, right now, teachers overwhelmingly feel a lack of support from administration, lack of respect, lack of teacher voice, which is why we're having this forum, lack of being able to get along. That relates back to the community, lack of chain of command, role and responsibilities, who's doing what and when, lack of control and autonomy, no trust in what I'm doing. And then, of course, collaboration, which is another thing that we noted is what should be making a positive culture, but isn't there. So that leads to who's responsible for this? Yeah, lack of chain of command definitely hints, which leads to this next section of what exactly is leadership doing? Where does this whole thing break down? So for DCPS, if you go to the website, they'll very clearly describe the roles and responsibilities of a DCPS principal. One of those responsibilities include developing and maintaining a purposeful school culture that supports a safe and effective learning environment. However, they are also responsible for, and are not limited to, learning for increased effectiveness, focusing on evidence-based growth, engaging school community members, listening and communicating with all stakeholders, managing a change process, engaging in constant learning, and that also includes leading instruction, articulating a clear instructional vision, implementing consistent school-wide reports, creating opportunities. The point is, it's a lot. All of these responsibilities fall upon the principal on leadership. Every job that exists inside of a school is also on the on the shoulders of the principals. They have to be responsible for food coordination if your school serves food. They also have to be responsible for any form of materials that need to be ordered. They're responsible for the curriculum planning. They need to be responsible for essentially every other job that exists inside of a school. As such, principals are actually leaving the same amount as teachers. So related to that third question, do teachers leave more than principals? The answer is no. That's false. They leave at the exact same rate. The line even says that every year, for as many, about 25% of principals or 25% of DCPS schools open with a new principal as well as new teachers. They are leaving at the exact same rate. Now, where do they go when they leave? It's sometimes they'll say they'll be transferred. Sometimes they'll say that they'll just leave the profession in general. In general, compared to like teachers, it's pretty much just as bad. That poor school culture affects everyone. They leave, maybe they go to school, get a different degree, maybe they go into policy, maybe they decide they never want to teach again. All these things happen. That came from the report of 2018. So this will be available to you once you get this slide. But all that information just tells me, at least, that poor school climate affects everybody. So, at least the question of who is responsible for school climate. Oh, Gabrielle, thank you for getting back in. I was worried what happened.
Here, I was lost somewhere in cyberspace. I got kicked out and couldn't get back in. I made it. I survived.
Glad to have you back. And Gabrielle, can you do a quick intro about what you bring with us and what you've been?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, my apologies, everybody, for being late. I am a 20-year veteran, a teacher. I've taught in public, private, and charter schools in the DC area, Dallas, and now I'm back in DC. Teaching at Duke Ellington. And so I've taught from preschool through high school students. I love all students at every grade level that I've had the opportunity to work with. I conform to what their needs are. And so that's why I'm excited to be in the classroom with students still. And I'm also delighted to be here with Jamal. As you all can already tell, he's done a lot of extensive work with regards to restorative justice and practices. So I'm here to support him, and also excited to be a part of this equity work that I have joined Empower Ed with in order to get done.
Thank you so much. We're just now getting caught up on talking about who is responsible for school climate. So that brings up the question of SROs. Who are they? What exactly do they do? This definition, this list of responsibilities comes explicitly from the School Safety and Security Report by MPDC. It's available online, but once you get this slide, you can actually click on that link and it'll give you everything that's here. But basically, SROs are MPD officers. They're required to meet all standard police training. They are there for prosecution for arrests, any form of emergency near their schools, and if they need to, they will make arrests of students. But more importantly, and this relates to that fourth question regarding like which is policing, which is peace building, they are responsible for coordinating mediations. They also are responsible for the Safe Passage initiative that's currently going on in DC, providing mentoring and outreach programs, conducting school security assessments, providing support in at-risk youth. We'll get into the truancy in the next slide. And then, of course, they visit and work with schools that feed into high school and middle school students. So I want to give a question to highlight Gabrielle's point. Gabrielle, could you talk about those questions there?
Yes, in the chat, if you take a look, everybody, there's two questions we'd like you all to focus on. Are there SROs at your school? Identify your school if that is the case. And second question, if you do have SROs or you've had interaction with them perhaps when you were growing up in your own school experience, can you indicate what that experience was as an educator or as a young person?
Mm-hmm. And as well, to your question, the CPS does have access to it, but that actually is going to lead to our next point about where SROs come in. We just want to know what your personal experience would have been. If you had one as a kid, if you've had one in your work life, maybe you have a relationship with one through some of your children's work or some other one, somebody's you've talked to. What has been your interaction with them?
Isabel, we see your question. My response is that, yes, there are SROs. If they're not in the school buildings on a daily basis, they are still assigned to schools, whether or not their presence is visible.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I mean, we had like a school security officer who I'm assuming was the SRO.
Hmm.
Okay.
And if you haven't had a lot of experiences with them, that's fine. That leads to the question that we're having a lot around SROs. It's like, what exactly is the problem? Why is this whole push about policing in schools coming up? Well, data suggests that in DC, 92% of school-based arrests are of Black youth. 60% of girls arrested in DC are under the age of 15. Again, school-age youth. There have been instances in which case children as young as 9 have been handcuffed and harassed, also of color. And going to that truancy point, that even though, yes, SROs do visit these students when they are truant, when MPD pick up youth, it is also exactly for truancy. Over 1,500 times are recorded in the last school cycle. And continuing on, the Black girls are arrested at least 30 times that of white girls and boys. And that's all Robin's point. Robin says, yes, Powell Elementary School and McFarland Middle School. At Powell, mostly very pleasant interactions, welcoming, warm, etc. And that's good. And that's the point I wanted to get to, because we have a lot of negativity around the SROs and what they're doing, what they're not doing. This information was taken again from the Black Swan Academy. You can find that link, go to that information. But I actually did spend the time to talk to the commissioner who's responsible for the school resource officer division. And as I talked to him about why these issues are happening, his top primary point was that there are really unclear roles and responsibilities. SROs have to be called into a situation. And even to Isabella's point, like, yes, every school has access to one. There's one available to them, but they have to be beckoned. Somebody at the school has to say, I need this person in my school in this instance for this situation. But by the time an instance does happen, let's say a child does go into crisis, a child's angry, maybe he's throwing around scissors. Somebody had to have had that contact with that child first. The teacher, maybe a behavioral tech, some sort of principal, some other person inside the school had the interaction with that youth before the SRO got called. And so by the time the SRO gets there, they're just wondering, like, what am I supposed to do? I don't have that immediate relationship with this child as you do. So what exactly do you want me to handcuff the child? Do you want me to put him restraint? What is the ask being made of me? And that whole notion of unclear roles and responsibilities that we touched on near the beginning comes up yet again. It seems people aren't really sure who's responsible for when these instances occur. Not only that, is that when these instances occur, people aren't really just on the same page about what to do about them, leading to the mindset around punishment. The two key words that you'll hear in restorative justice training is the notion of retributive justice versus restorative justice. Retributive, which is to pay back, literally from the Greek term retribute, is to say that if you do harm to me, I will harm you. That is the formal notion, is that if you've stolen for something, well, now you gotta go to jail or something like that. Your time is now being costed because of the act that you did. Whereas restorative is more so like, okay, there was harm. There was an instance that created a need. How can you restore whatever that need was, and therefore improve, strengthen that community that you are a part of? That mindset about what you should do in those situations varies. And that's why when some people call the officers, they want the kid to be like arrested, they want the kid to be taken out, they want these things to happen. But sometimes that's not what the child needs. And even when I talked to the commissioner about it, he's like, sometimes we've had kids that have these instances, but when we got there, it was very clear that they just needed to be heard. So he'll tell me that SROs will actually just be the listening ear. That mindset, that concept of what punishment should be, is where those major breaking points seem to be. We also have the issue of safety with educators, though. This must be addressed because there are instances, again, I've been bitten, I've been punched, I've had all these things happen to me. And there are instances even where teachers have lost their unborn children because of the violence that has happened to them. So that's a legitimate concern about safety. And an extension of that, if you're a parent and you send your child into a school, you are trusting that particular school to keep your child safe. So if you do have your child come back and say, yeah, there was a kid throwing scissors today, or there's a kid who punched me in the eye, naturally, parents are going to be concerned. They want to know what happened. How did this even happen? Who's responsible for keeping this to happen? But yet no one seems to have an agreement on to what extent SROs should be involved. So what does this mean? In general, SROs have a responsibility but the responsibilities and methodologies aren't clear. This is because no one is directly responsible for relationships, because it's everyone's responsibility to develop that quality of relationship, to develop that school climate. And positive school culture requires proactive involvement from all who are within it, rather than a reactionary sense like, okay, an instance happened, I need to address this behavior, get this kid out of here, make this kid or suspend this child or something like that. What could we have done in advance to attend to that behavior, to attend to whatever that need was that that child had? And which is where restorative justice comes into play. So with that, I'll pass it over to Gabrielle.
Okay, and I just want to sort of reiterate what Jamal was talking about there, that, you know, restorative justice and practices are not a magic bullet. There are situations and instances where a stronger disciplinary measure is needed and necessary. However, there are other tools, additional tools that can be added to the kit so that every behavioral challenge is not met with the same punitive actions as though there aren't any other opportunities. So when we take a look at restorative justice, we can think about it being a broad term because it is similar to an umbrella. And so under the umbrella then of restorative justice are the restorative practices that can be implemented from situation to situation, school to school, et cetera. So again, restorative justice, the broad term. It's a growing social movement that is seeking to institutionalize it. Don't let the perhaps negative connotations of that word be misleading. It just simply means to have become a part of the institution, non-punitive access, opportunities, options that are relationship centered. And so then restorative practices would look on a practical measure such as this, strengthening relationships. I also like the word studies that you see there listed in the definition of restorative practices, because studies indicates and implies that it's an ongoing work. It is a growing work. Even as students are alive and growing, we are as humans. So the practices then that can be implemented within the classroom, within the entire school climate, should be ongoing and growing, even as we are as individuals. And so then also, again, restorative practices are centered on relationship building, which will affect and impact the school culture overall. It does say here that the structure and implementation will vary from school to school, but all of it is based on the same foundation, which is to serve as an alternative to traditional, particularly exclusionary disciplinary actions that cannot be the easy go-to, as it has been traditionally. So we take a look then on the left side, we see what restorative justice and practices are not. On the right side, what they are. I love the right side. It indicates it's a process. On the left, it says it's not instant. It is not that. Life is not instant. Life itself is a process. So is restoration. As it says on the right side, restorative practices are tools. They involve an agreement between whoever the offender is and the other person who was the recipient of the offense. It does require a shift in mindset, because when you look on the left side in terms of what restorative practices or justice is not, you see the punishment that is there, the ousting, the rejection. Those seem to be have been easy fixes to behavioral challenges. But look at where that type of practice has led us statistically, and particularly in communities of color. Right? So again, with this next slide, just taking, and we'll talk about how does it work. We're going to look at some of the practical steps then that can be shared and taught in training sessions, discussed over the summer, included in PD sessions that really matter if we want to have a different approach in terms of supporting the whole child, right? Restorative practices and procedures should be designed by the major stakeholders at the school campus, not just the principals and the admin, but obviously the counselors, the SROs, and the teachers as well. Having restorative dialogue, words have power and can absolutely shape and form environments. and the listener in terms of choices. Having school-wide activities throughout the school year that are focused on restorative practices. What does that look like in each particular school? That's what the PD session should be about uncovering. On the right side here, it mentions conducting as a restorative practice, conducting classroom circles during instruction time. That can happen at every single grade level, coming together and having these types of conversations at the top of the class, maybe twice a week, where the restorative practice language and activities are mentioned and re-mentioned so that students can be mindful of being great citizens in their schools. Having positive community service opportunities that allows the child to connect with the school body, the school climate, and their community as well. Apologies being offered and welcomed, and agreements between, again, the child offender and whoever may have been the recipient of the offense, to have an agreement between them that is facilitating restoration as opposed to punitive disciplinary action.
Wait, sorry, my annotation tool is on. All right, so there's a lot of information there. In summary, one of the 4 big things that it can do is that it can help build and maintain positive relationships and community. It can also be used as an increased support for Tier 1 mental health supports. It can help with the complex parent-school relationships. And it can develop positive responsiveness and negative student behavior when support isn't always available, be that an SRO or some behavior tech. This information here can be found on the School Talks document that is also attached to this particular page. So when you get this particular slide, you'll see at the bottom that there's another slide link that'll take you to School Talks that talks about how restorative justice can be used leading into reentry, leading to once schools and students and teachers and staff return. But for now, the easy question is, what can I do right now? Which leads to our first activity. The 3 core questions of restorative justice is always what happened, what harm has been caused, and what needs were created from that harm. And then, after you ask those questions, can lead to how can you support, redevelop, or improve that particular relationship. I want you to spend 5 minutes just reflecting on these questions. Questions relating to your experiences with a negative school climate, either as a teacher or as a student, then what harm happened because of that experience, what needs were created, and then of course, what are you willing to do to support, redevelop, improve it? So if your cameras aren't off already, you can turn those off, mute yourself, take 5 minutes to reflect, and then we'll have 5 minutes to share out. All right, that is time. Now, would anyone care to share their responses to these questions on screen?
I can start. I think the most obvious harm is just that kids are pushed out of school. They don't see themselves, well, they don't see school as a place that they want to go to because it's not welcoming to them. Therefore, they're disengaged and they don't want to return. And, you know, as like elementary school kids, that can come out as just like complete disengagement, like not feeling like they can be part of their classroom community. But as older kids, I imagine that it looks like, you know, either dropping out or just like lots of truancy.
And I would just add to that the confusion then that students often have because, you know, the positive mantra that is given to them at the top of every school year is that, you know, the teachers and staff were here for you to be, you know, successful and learn, et cetera. But then when the school environment is not positive and they feel like they are being ousted, they don't have a way back after they've made a mistake, then how perplexing is that for the young person to really understand, you know, what's happening here? I thought this was a safe place, you know, and that's not what they find.
And Michael, I don't know if you're there, but if you had any experiences that you would like to contribute.
Not as an educator because I'm not, but you know, I was once a student, and I do recall, I mean, a long time ago in grade school of you know, bullying being an issue intermittently. It wasn't really a chronic thing, but I do remember there was a long stretch involving one student in particular, and I just remember it being kind of poorly handled by everybody involved. And I just don't know, even at the time, if they had really kind of gotten their head around bullying dynamics or what the best approach was. But that did leave an impression on me all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
Being really upset by it as a kid. I wasn't the target of it, but it was really, really unpleasant to see a peer being treated the way this poor kid was being treated, and trying to do something about it. And the parents and teachers and everybody just, I don't think, handling it really, really well, for as well as intentioned as it may have been.
No, and I appreciate that, because that's the thing, is these small instances, these small betrayals of relationships, if it were, they can happen at any age, and that can still have an impact on you even today. As a fully developed adult, you can still remember that negatively.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's the important talk about this. Did you have something you want to add as well?
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you though.
So no, these questions, the opening up the space, asking what the experience was, what is the harm, identifying the needs, and then figuring out what to do to support and develop and improve it, those are the processes for restorative justice. But now when we're talking about support, redevelop, and improve, here's a question of what can we do right now in DC as it relates to these efforts. And right now, thankfully, DC is actually, I would honestly say, ahead in terms of a lot of different services that are available. This relates to about the fifth question, is how many schools are currently getting support. 13 schools currently in the DC area are actually getting support from School Talks. School Talks DC is explicitly the restorative justice org that works with schools, both in the public and charter. So that way you can actually get at least some some training. There we go. That's the word I was thinking for. So that you can get training in restorative justice cycle. Leading to the following question is, can DCPS get the access to SAL and school support? That answer is actually true. Every school, at least in DCPS, has access to social, emotional, and school culture support. It is unclear about that information, and I actually spent some time talking to William Blake, who runs a social emotional learning department in DCPS. But there is a cluster system, in which case, and this link is attached here, depending on where your school is, what ward you're in, there is a designated individual whose job it is to give you the resources you need in order to fully conduct a social emotional learning and school culture climate tools. So that is actually publicly available. It's just not publicly dispersed in terms of knowledge. If you want to get more training for yourself, and then maybe outside of the school system, there's the DC Peace team. They have a group that I support, and we have weekly sessions regularly. So there's a calendar here. The CJCC, which is the Department for, I guess you could say, Justice Coordinating Council. This team developed a report in 2019 regarding all the different restorative justice efforts in DC as of this time. So when you click on that link, it'll take you to the website, and it'll show you the entire report, all the hundreds of pages that are going to it, well, not hundreds, several pages that go into it, that'll show you the current updates regarding that. DYRS currently uses restorative justice initiatives. Office of Attorney General also has a restorative justice program. And Restorative DC, which is like the head hub for a lot of restorative justice initiatives, has a whole programming schedule for PDs. So now, the last section I would like us to do is an activity, in which case we'll be using a Padlet in order to answer some questions. So let me share with you this screen, and I'm going to share the link with you in the chat. But on this Padlet, there are 5 questions relating to who, what, where, when, and how you can use restorative justice. So this particular link, and I'll click the share button now and copy link, and therefore put it into the chat. All you have to do is go to that Padlet and click on one of these sections where you can add who do you contact when you want more training. And it could be what you know. You don't have to have a full answer, but just think about who can I contact, either in my school or in my, I guess you could say, sphere of knowledge. Who could I contact if I want to know more about that? What kind of training is available? What can I even find? What could I even look for? And then, of course, I said, that's fair.
It's fair, absolutely.
Of course, where can I apply this tool / knowledge? Like maybe you can think of it in the classroom, maybe you can think of it amongst staff people, maybe you can think of it in terms of like your own personal life. Where can I apply this tool and knowledge? Where's the next discipline hearing? If you know it, if you don't know it, that's fine. We'll get some information there as well. And then of course, this one seems to be left off, but how is the school climate fund being used in my school? Now, this is more of a challenge question because not everyone seems to know that there is a school climate fund currently available, recently released as of like this school financial fiscal year, that is being used explicitly for services like this because this all relates to the school climate fund. Question is, how is it being used in your school? Did you even know you had access to it? What does that even look like? Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's just you can say if you don't know. Take a minute to fill that out. Okay. I'll give it about another 30 seconds. Since we don't have like a huge group, I'm not expecting a never-ending list of responses. But plenty of feedback, which is useful. All these notifications, you guys signing on my tablet. So I turn this off. Turn off notifications. Oh, cool. Okay. So, thank you for filling that out. Now, aside from obviously me, there are, you can definitely think of like, if you don't necessarily know who else to talk to, maybe your dean of students, maybe your therapist and you're tired of your schools, maybe contact them because some of these methodologies related to RJ is really just simple communication, simple relationship building, going in asking, how are you feeling? How did that affect you today? What can we do to support you? It doesn't sound like much, but it is literally the basis of restorative justice. So asking individuals like that, what kind of training is available? There's plenty, yes. Where you can find it should be in DCPS, but again, you may not find it in those newsletters because for whatever reason, communication gets lost in the DC school system. If you're a teacher, we know this. But School Talks actually has a regular calendar, so you can go through and find that information. I know the DCP team. Yep, they actually have nonviolent responses or potentially violent issues. So we also do, aside from restorative justice, we teach nonviolent communication. We also do unarmed civilian protections. All those types of trainings are available through DCP team. And then, of course, where can you apply this tool? In your classroom, of course. And even if you're not confident, you can still learn as you go because restorative justice isn't about saying that you did it perfectly the first time. It's about saying that, hey, an instance happened. How can we improve it going forward? And then, of course, it can apply in a lot of different places in life, community, classrooms, etc. And a lot of stuff, the last two, not sure, that's actually what I was hoping for because I'm going to give you those answers right now. So in relation to all these things that have been mentioned, what we need or what you, I guess, should know, and I'll get to that one. The resource page, again, School Talks is available. Here's the contact information. DCP's team also available. Here, I've even added a little link related to impact justice. They actually give you and establish a foundation of restorative justice in your school crammer. It's actually like you go to that session, it'll tell you what's restorative justice. What does it look like? They'll give you videos, they'll give you slides, and they'll ask you questions like, who can I ask to get this started? Where do I need to go to get training? And you can just go through each slide, each section, and it'll give you the booster kind of to get you started. But DCP's team and School Talks, well, especially School Talks, actually has a DC foundational I guess you could say, manual that you could use in order to start this in your school if you haven't already. In relation to those last two, where are these hearings happening and what are these funds being used for? Several of these committees, whether it be the Judiciary and Safety or Public Safety hearing, the Police Reform Commission, which currently has an entire panel just for policing in schools, and I've been in conversations with them trying to learn more about how they're applying restorative justice going forward. And then even the Committee on Recreation, Libraries, and Youth Affairs. I added this one because we don't have enough conversations about what the youth want in their schools. And when I went to one of these hearings, I actually just listened to a bunch of kids talk about what they wanted. Some wanted more police. Some think that police in schools would only lead to more violence. Some would actually like to see some form of alternatives where only the community is leading the mediations. So getting more youth voice in these conversations is super key. But the whole list of events, calendars for all these different communities are on the DC Council events link. So when you get this slide, you'll have access to all of that. So we have exactly like 2, maybe 3 minutes. Does anyone have any questions, reflections, or additions?
This is very informative. Thank you.
Welcome, Isabel.
Yeah, great job. This has been very interesting.
It's a lot.
I was saying the same thing. It's a lot of information, right? But it's not difficult to understand. It requires a commitment to learn about restorative practices and make the necessary steps, have the conversations needed as well in order to be able to engraft and implement these practices into the classroom, into our school community. It's absolutely possible. And it's happening, as I think Jamal alluded to. It's sometimes some schools are not aware that they're actually involved in restorative practices. They don't know what to call it, but it's already happening because the old traditional way is really not working, and the data does support that.
Mm-hmm. And it has, like I said, as someone's mentioned, it has a lot of applications. It doesn't necessarily just have to be in the school. Some of these initiatives that relates to safe passage, which is what SROs are involved with. These conversations that I went to MICVA, DC. MICVA is another youth advocacy organization that I went to talk to. They were one of the people who suggested that, like, some people want police, but a lot of people want community kind of restoration. And that's where restorative justice can come in as well. It doesn't just have to be in the classroom. It doesn't have to be in the school. It can be about your neighbor who's blasting music too loudly, and that's an issue. Restorative justice can also be used as extensively as murder, honestly. There's actually a certain format called the victim offender dialogue. Victim offender dialogues are used explicitly when there's a loss of life and somebody wants closure to heal. So rather than putting them in jail for an extended period, maybe for life, a variety of people have actually signed up to do these victim offender dialogues. And on a separate slide, which is not for today, there's a whole list of information in how in Canada, like 90% of the people who went through a victim offender dialogue did not commit another crime after 1 year. 86 did not commit a crime after 5 years. And then some actually just don't return to the system at all. Now, again, this is just the data that's being recorded in Canada. DC has some ways to go, but they've currently developed a system in which case they're trying to make this accountability system for restorative efforts in the DC area. They just haven't launched that information yet. And the only reason I know this is because I've been spending like the last 2 months asking around. So when it's available, you'll see it. And obviously, Isabel, since you know me directly, just ask me, I'm assuming. So, all right, we have a few seconds left. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or anything?
No, thank you, Jamal.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you both.
No problem. And yes, thank you, Gabriel. It's like, thank you, because you were also helpful for my reflections. Because mind you, when I first put this, it was just data. It was just all charts and like numbers. And then the Gabriel was like, maybe you should highlight some things. And I'm like, you're right.
Good teamwork.
All right, everybody. We'll see you in the main section.
Then have a good one. Yeah.